Hey, this is WhyBeAre with BeamNG.drive, and today we're going to be taking a look at the alpha version 0.19 update. The first thing you'll probably notice is the menus look different. It now has a dark color scheme to it. The second thing you may or may not notice is that the garage button is gone. In fact, the whole garage feature is gone. And the garage is not a feature I used very often. In fact, I can't even remember the last time that I used it. It feels like it's a way of customizing cars designed for if you were playing this game on the TV using only a controller. But the way I play the game, I have access to a controller and a mouse and keyboard, so using this always felt clunky compared to the normal car customization menus that you always see me use. By the way, this is the old version of the game. I just brought the old version up to show you what the garage looked like while I was talking about it. And we are back to the updated version. If we go to the scenarios menu, you will see there are 3 new scenarios. It's supply delivery, gravity fuel, and soccer. These will get their own separate video at a later date, but I wanted to make sure you guys knew they existed. And for most of this video, we're going to be driving around Small Island, USA, because it has had some major revamps and it looks pretty much completely different to how it looked before. The only reason I know it's Small Island, USA is because I recognize the road layouts. And even though this place looks completely different, it is not the most interesting change in this update. The most interesting change is the new vehicle called the Cherrier FCV. And it's called the FCV because it has multiple vehicles inside of it. It has the Vivace and the Tograc. The Vivace is a nice, really cool looking hatchback. And then the Tograc is this hideous looking crossover thing that's based on the Vivace. Let's drive the hideous looking Tograc a little bit. And as you saw, there are a lot of options for this vehicle. I have an in-depth video later on, but for this video, I want to give you guys a taste of the Cherrier FCV. What do crashes taste like? I don't know, but that's what they look like. It actually did quite a bit of damage because it hit at a really downward angle. Still drivable though, but for how long? Let's do another crash into here. This is about 40 miles per hour. And engine broken, rear drive shaft broken. That is a destroyed vehicle. You notice the front is completely mashed in. Passenger's compartment mostly intact. So that's a good sign for safety. And now that we got the first crash out of the way, why don't we take a closer look at the outside of this vehicle? And I want to look at both the hatchback and the crossover versions of the vehicle. So I'm just driving over to a nice wide open area where we can easily see them. And I'm just going to go ahead and grab any of the Vivaces to spawn up next to it. So this is the Vivace. It's this nice little 4-door hatchback that comes from France. And then we also have the Tograc, which is this absolutely hideous crossover thing that's based on the Vivace. And one of the neat things about the FCV is that there are gasoline, diesel, and electric versions of the vehicle. So I'm grabbing an electric Vivace, and what is the first thing you do with any electric vehicle? You drive it underwater. And while I drive underwater, I want you to listen because there are now underwater sounds when you're underwater. As a person who really liked making the ESBR into a submarine, that's a nice little feature. Plus, it has now doubled the amount of submarines we have, because we can now use the SBR or the FCV. And you know how some people say, oh, I need a crossover because I do light off-roading. Look at me bomb down this dirt road, barely staying on the road even, and this hatchback is doing perfectly fine. And as far as I know, there is no damage to it so far. That's not right. There should be some damage to it, shouldn't there? So, instead of staying on the dirt road, here we go off the road and into some trees, or around the trees, because we're going to bounce like that. And will it land on its wheels? Yes, it will. Although I think my steering is a little bit gone, but you can see some of the damage. And yeah, steering is absolutely awful at this point. I basically have none. So we're just going to let it crash into whatever. And then can we back it out, or is it stuck? It is stuck, so I'm just going to go ahead and reset it out of this tree and bring it back to the clearing. And then how about something a little different? We'll go with the Tograc QE, which is the crossover version of the one we were just driving. Man, look at this hideous thing. Those wheels are so cheesy. Color matched wheels that are that brightly colored. Who does that? Crossover makers do, that's who. Actually, if I'm being honest, this one really doesn't look that bad because it doesn't have the hideous black plastic cladding you so often see on crossovers. And you can see the suspension doing some work here. This is why I hate crossovers. A hatchback suspension would not bounce that much. Maybe. I should admit, I'm giving this car a lot of crap, but in reality, I'm glad that it exists in BeamNG.drive because crossovers are one of the most popular types of vehicles being sold nowadays. And it was kind of weird that they didn't have one, even though it's not the kind of vehicle that would normally appeal to a car enthusiast. Because crossovers are kind of like the compromise, lowest common denominator vehicle. It's a vehicle that's made to appeal to the widest audience, but it doesn't have anything really special about it, like a lot of more niche cars that more frequently would appeal to a car enthusiast. Anyways, enough of talking about crossovers. We've been three-wheeling this thing for a while, and it's doing great. So what if we took it up another level? Instead of staying on the track, we go off the track and through the bushes and such. And even doing that, it's actually doing decently enough. Also, one thing that's kind of neat about this car is the rear bumper has a piece of the fender attached to it. So there's like a black plastic strip that you see hanging onto the bumper very clearly right there. I think it's kind of neat to see that. And now I have found the other crossover. Let's have a crossover meetup. Hello, other crossover. So we got a little bit of damage to this thing. Actually, a lot more than I expected. It was already a little damaged though. And now I'm going to go ahead and swap over to a more fun to drive car. We're going to go with the fastest production version of the Vivace, which is the S410Q. And this has a 5-cylinder engine, and this is a new sound for BeamNG.drive, so I want you guys to be able to listen to it and hear what it sounds like. I wanted to make sure I got that airtime in there because then you could really hear it bouncing off the rev limiter like that. And surprisingly, this thing is still somewhat drivable, but not really because we're getting stuck on the rocks. So there's just a quick look at the damage. And then we'll bring it back, and I want to talk to you guys about driving modes because you see a lot of modern cars that have things like a sport button. And what that button actually does can vary quite a bit. On basic, more economy-focused cars, it might just change the shift point a little bit. On more advanced cars, like I know the Corvette, for example, has some of these features, it'll stiffen up the suspension, it'll change the engine's responsiveness by opening up the exhaust so it's louder and it gets a little bit more powerful. And this vehicle does that kind of stuff. Also, if we go to the inside, it'll also change the colors of the gauges. And I will give you guys a more in-depth look at the interior later on, but man, I like that texture, that green. Ooh, that looks nice on the seats, don't it? Anyways though, you can see the color of the gauges changes depending on which driving mode you have, and then also you can feel the difference in the suspension, and then you can also hear the difference between comfort mode, which closes up the exhaust, and the other modes that really open it up. So I want you guys to listen for the difference here. Hopefully you could tell that comfort mode was quieter than the other modes. And now, let's go ahead and try out the racing version. This is the Vivace Race. And you can tell this is a pretty serious wide body kit on this vehicle. It is much wider on both the rear and the front compared to the stock version of the vehicle. One of the interesting things though is this is actually using the 4-cylinder engine. It does not use the 5-cylinder like I was expecting. In fact, it even makes less power than the stock 5-cylinder version. And all of the fancy souped-up versions use the 4-cylinder version except for the Hill Climb, which uses a modified version of the 5-cylinder, which makes like 670 horsepower or something ridiculous like that. Anyways, here's just a little crash, which we might be able to keep driving after, actually. Let's see. It's really slow. It's not getting into the right gear. It's in automatic mode, so it should get there eventually. There we go. And back onto the road, and we can keep on driving. So with the roll cage, a very sturdy vehicle and a very stripped down vehicle. This thing feels really stiff and mean as you drive it. Pretty much the exact kind of feeling you would want in a race car. It feels great even though it's a 4-door hatchback. It doesn't matter. It's been made into a great car. Although the tire's deflated, it's ruined. Let's just wreck it even more. Is he gonna go into the water? Come on, don't go all the way in the water. I want to be able to drive out of here, hopefully. Oh, good, okay. And instead of driving out with this one, we're gonna swap over to the rally version of the vehicle. And this thing's fun because it backfires a ton and it sounds really unique compared to all the other sounds in BeamNG.drive, so I want you to be able to hear it. I love it when it does that little rapid fire as we're in the air. That is the best sound. Now would be a good time to do the rapid fire, except I wasn't fully revved up as we hit the jump. And we'll keep kind of pushing it along since it wants to drive, but it's not going to last very long. In fact, all of the Vivace stuff isn't going to last very long because it's time to move on to some of the non-Vivace stuff in this update. But before we do that, the final look at the Rally Vivace. And I'll just leave that guy there. We don't need him anymore. Another removed feature that I want to talk about, because this is actually a feature I use pretty frequently, is the ability to save a vehicle's damage after a crash. Like, I'll use this pretty often when a vehicle gets stuck and I want to look at the damage, because sometimes when you go around and teleport the vehicle, it'll reset the damage and then you don't get to see it. So it's always good to just save it beforehand as an extra safety measure. But that feature is completely been removed for the game. And the reason given was that it's just not being maintained, so it's probably bound to be glitchy, basically. Although, oddly enough, the load button is still there. But there's no way to save, so it's half removed. It's still half there. You can still see it and remember it. But save is gone, so it's basically nothing you can do with the load button. Also, the sound of the fire is a little bit different. That's definitely the kind of situation where you'd have to go back to the old one and see what it sounds like to notice the difference, but I do like this sound better. And now, really, actually getting off of the FCV, how about we go to the Piccolina, which has a new version called the Tricolor, or if you want to be fancy, the Tricolor, because it has an E at the end and not just Tricolor. And it just looks like a flag, basically. It's got a cool paint job on it. I quite like it. It's nothing special in terms of performance or anything like that. It's just a basic version of the vehicle, but it has a really cool paint job. Like, just the paint job's new. That's it. I like paint jobs, though. And this is such a basic paint job, but it's nice, man. Because this is very much an Italian vehicle. And that's the only major change for the Piccolina we're going to be covering. The D-Series, on the other hand, has quite a few major changes. The biggest thing is that there are now the D10 to D30 variants of the vehicle. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab a D10 so you can see what that is. A D10 is basically a regular pickup with a cab on it, but inside of the cab, you have additional seating. So you see this thing has 3 rows of seats, and then even has still a ton of space back here to put whatever you want back there. So you have it in the D10 version, and then you also have a D30 version as well, which is just a beefy version. So you have the D35 Chief Rancher, who I love, and then you have the Kentark D30 V8 4-wheel drive, which is almost a Chief Rancher with some extra seats in the rear, basically. I love how that looked like just an explosion of glass as I removed the piece. And then again, looks pretty much the same as the truck we were just looking at. And then another pretty big change is that there are old versions of the truck and new versions of the truck. So I'm going to show you the difference. That is, I believe, an old version. And then we're going to get the D15 V8 4-wheel drive as the new version. And if you look at the front here, you can just see it has a completely different face to it on this one versus this one. And to be honest with you guys, I think I like the older one better. Like, yeah, it definitely looks older, but I really dig the way it looks. It could just be, you know, the developers made this one a long time ago and they're getting better at making cooler looking cars, or I just like the older style. It also has a different set of mirrors on it for the older one. Although, I would definitely take the modern mirrors. Like, I gotta make my own custom truck. That's a mix mash of the two trucks. That's just my favorite parts blended together. Because I also like the rear bumper on this one with the rivets on it. It makes it look all manly and strong like a truck should. And then one other change we have is a step side bed, which is something I personally am not really a huge fan of because it doesn't seem like it's very practical. But it does exist on real trucks, and I will admit, I like the way it looks. I just don't like the reduced practicality, because when you have a step side, what happens is the width of the bed ends up getting reduced. So if I pull this cover off and we were to look at both of these vehicles from straight above, you'll see the width of the bed is going to be quite a bit less. So this one goes all the way out to here, basically, with the bed. And on this one, it's a lot less. The benefit, though, is in addition to having the little step, it's completely flat the entire way. With the other one, it has the wheel well encroaching into the bed a little bit, which means really it's just an alternative option and you choose whichever you like more. And there is one more D series that I want to take a look at, and this one has a kind of interesting name. It's the LTRV Marauder. And this one has a diesel V8 engine, and it's a military surplus vehicle, so it has some military style parts that you don't see on the other ones. Most notably, the antennas, which wobble all over the place and are just fun to fling about and watch them go back and forth. And you take this thing off-roading and they bounce all over the place. It's a lot of fun. Here, let's do that real quickly. Just straight up this hill and you get to watch the antennas bouncing about. I love big antennas doing that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, you can't really see the vehicle, so we bring it back. And in addition to that, it has some extra hitches in the back that you could grab it if it gets stuck off-roading. And then some in the front as well. And then also this weird logo, which I guess is some sort of military logo or something. It just looks like half a Pac-Man eating a dot to me, though. Next up, we're going to move over to the H series. And for the H series, we now have the long wheelbase versions. And these are just like the normal ones, but longer. How much longer? Well, I bet the best way for you to see how much longer it is just to have one of each side by side. So there is the difference. Have a better camera angle like that. So you can see it's a good, maybe foot and a little bit more longer than the normal one. So it has a decent bit of extra space to store your tools if you're the kind of person who has tools that need to be stored. In addition to that, there's a new version called the Fantastic. And if you look at the thumbnail a little bit, the tires are like inside of the ground just a tiny bit. But this is the beefiest, off-roadiest version of the Vanster you will ever see. I guess it's not a version of the Vanster, it's just a version of the H series, but it looks like a beefier Vanster basically when I look at it. And it'll do great off-roading, just up this hill without much issue. It even had a low gear if I needed it, but I didn't. And while we're on the topic of extended vehicles, the Roamer has a very similar addition to it. So there are some that are LXT and some that are just the XT. The LXT means it's longer. That's just what the L stands for. The XT stands for the same thing normally, I assume. And again, to show you the difference, we're going to grab one of each side by side. And then you can see the difference in length. So again, maybe about a foot longer on this one. And then it has the doors that are like this on this one that I chose. Those doors always look cooler, don't they? Like, I'm not the only one who thinks those doors look cooler than that kind. Plus, you're never going to hit your head on these doors. I always hit my head on that kind of door because I'm just a little bit too tall. Just the tiniest bit too tall. It's so annoying. But that's the only major change I'm going to cover for the Roamer. The next thing I want to talk about are the changes to the driving dynamics, which are mostly focused around how the assist in the car works. So like ABS, electronic stability control, and traction control. And this is one of those things where I need a lot of time to really get a feel for the changes. But the biggest thing I noticed is you don't have that problem where you'll be flooring it and the car just won't accelerate for some reason. That seems to be gone, which is great because that was always really annoying to me. And my initial impression is that the car is a little more understeer likely than it was before. Maybe. I'm not saying that as a fact. It's just my initial impressions. Again, this is something I need a lot of time to really be able to say what the difference is, especially considering most of the time I turn off stability control and then just drive it without it because it's more fun to me like that. Anyways, that's going to do it for this video. And as I mentioned earlier, there will be additional videos that go over both the scenarios and the Vivace in more detail, the VCR as well. Yeah, and until next time, this has been WhyBeAre, and remember, if you like or dislike this video, I'll know. I can tell by how much useless ground clearance the Tograc has. So do the right thing, and I'll see you next time.